The White House on Thursday released a summary of the after-action reports on the chaotic U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, laying part of the blame on President Joe Biden's predecessor, Donald Trump.
President Biden inherited a forced presence in Afghanistan of some 2,500 troops. That was the lowest since 2001. He inherited a special immigrant visa program that had been starved of resources. And he inherited a deal struck between the previous administration and the Taliban that called for the complete removal of all U.S. troops by May of 2021, or else the Taliban, which had stopped its attacks while the deal was in place, would go back to war against the United States.
White House National Security spokesman John Kirby told reporters at a press briefing Thursday that Biden was left with a stark choice: withdraw all U.S. forces or resume fighting with the Taliban. The report points to deliberate degradation by the Trump administration, an accusation that Kirby said refers to the drawdown of U.S. troops during Trump's time in office, the release of thousands of Taliban prisoners, the negotiation of the Doha Agreement to end the war without the local government, and the virtual freezing of an Afghan visa program. Kirby said the Trump administration was not forthcoming when asked for withdrawal plans, affording little in the way of transition between the administrations. The Taliban overran Afghanistan in August 2021 as the former Western-backed government in Kabul quickly collapsed and the last U.S. troops withdrew.
No agency predicted a Taliban takeover in 9 days. No agency predicted the rapid fleeing of President Ghani, who had indicated to us his intent to remain in Afghanistan up until he departed on the 15th of August. And no agency predicted that the more than 300,000 trained and equipped Afghan national security and defense forces would fail to fight for their country, especially after 20 years of American support.
13 U.S. service members were killed by a suicide bomber at Kabul's airport during the evacuation. The 12-page document acknowledged that the administration learned lessons from the withdrawal and now errs on the side of aggressive communication about risks in a destabilized security environment. But Kirby said leaving the country was ultimately the right choice.
America is on a stronger strategic footing, more capable to support Ukraine and to meet our security commitments around the world, as well as the competition with China, because it is not fighting a ground war in Afghanistan.
Ukraine soldiers trained at a shooting range near Bakhmut, where Ukrainian and Russian forces on Thursday battled in the streets. In footage released Wednesday, Ukrainian Border Service spokesperson Levko Stek said the fighting has not let up.
The intensity of Russian artillery attacks did not decrease, which you can hear right now. Walking through the town streets, shelling accompanies our movements all the time. You can hear it for yourselves. Also, one can see it on the residential buildings. We're now in a neighborhood with 5-story buildings, and they're all damaged to some degree.
Meanwhile, diplomatic efforts continue to try to resolve the conflict. During a visit to Beijing Thursday, French President Emmanuel Macron urged Chinese leader Xi Jinping to use his influence to persuade Russia to halt the war and come to the negotiating table.
The Russian aggression in Ukraine has dealt a blow to this stability. It ended decades of peace in Europe. I know I can count on you, moreover under the 2 principles I've just mentioned, to bring Russia to its senses and everyone to the negotiating table.
Xi expressed similar sentiments.
Regarding the Ukraine crisis, China advocates for peace talks and seeks a political solution. China is willing to join the French side in calling on the international community to maintain a rational restraint and avoid taking actions that will further aggravate the crisis or even get out of control.
The head of the EU, who also participated in talks with Xi, said the Chinese leader expressed a willingness to speak to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. The months-long battle for Bakhmut, one of the last urban centers in that part of the country yet to fall to Moscow, has proven to be one of the bloodiest of Russia's invasion, now in its 14th month.
This has been one of the worst weeks of 2023 so far in terms of anti-LGBTQ bills becoming law in states across America. 3 anti-LGBTQ laws have been enacted so far this week in Kansas, Indiana, and Idaho. Look, this is awful news. Let's be very clear about that. LGBTQI plus kids are resilient. They are fierce, they fight back, they're not going anywhere, and we have their back. This administration has their back. We are so proud of the kids across this country who have organized protests and school walkouts to tell the politicians in their states to stop this legislative bullying. I know that these political attacks can really take toll on people's mental health. So I want to say directly to LGBTQI plus kids, you are loved just as you are, just the way you are. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, you call 988, the National Crisis Hotline, and dial the number 3 to talk to a counselor who has been specifically trained to support LGBTQI plus kids. This is a new service that the Biden administration is proud to offer during these incredibly hard times for these trans kids.
European aviation is gearing up for potential Easter travel disruption brought on by strikes and cancellations. The warnings from airlines and airports show aviation is still vulnerable to external pressures. That's despite efforts to avoid a repeat of last year's chaotic queues and cancellations seen during the summer holiday season. Airlines have spent months trying to deal with labour shortages through better coordination and staffing up. Any disruption is unlikely to end a debate over the European Union's strict passenger compensation rules. Airlines say they have to pay remuneration without themselves getting compensated for air traffic delays. But consumer groups argue air traffic control strikes are not new. They believe airlines should be quicker to react and pay compensation. European lobby group, the European Consumer Organisation, say consumer prepayments for air tickets should be phased out, especially in times of disruption. They argue airlines often spend that money quickly and leave consumers struggling for months to get their money back. The current strikes have coincided with a recovery in travel demand. Departures from Britain during the Easter weekend are due to go up 11% compared with last year, though still lower than before the health crisis. France is particularly hard hit with ongoing strikes against Emmanuel Macron's controversial pension reform. Airlines and airports were criticised in the media and parliaments for their handling of last year's air travel surge, but they say there is little they can do when it comes to Europe's growing industrial unrest.